Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this special podcast. Thank you, Dan, for joining me in this special podcast. Today, we are going to define and differentiate expertise based knowledge management, how it is different from, not, from content based knowledge management or document based, and why it is recommended to have a sustained approach to a successful knowledge management. Dan, any opening word before moving to our questions?
I'm excited about being on this podcast with you, Rashad. It's always a pleasure, and thanks for having me. And let's go ahead and get started.
Yes, great. So then you and we analyzed and compared 100 tools in the context of organizational learning and knowledge management. We find a gap between the pitch, between the message that every vendor, well, the majority, pitching for knowledge management solution. But when you start to use those solutions, you tailor it down to content, to document, to the explicit form of knowledge. And here, my question to you, is it that difficult to develop a true knowledge management solution rather than a content or document based knowledge management solution? And my personal opinion, and I believe many shares the same point of view, multiple tools falls into data and information system category rather than knowledge management. So what's your take?
I definitely agree. Early on, what we've seen, whether it's um, generative AI, agentic AI, et cetera, focus has definitely been on content that's often referred to as data, but it's things that are written down, basically. And I think we have a real opportunity to move into where most knowledge exists, and that's within the heads, tacit knowledge within our heads, maybe 80% to give a number versus 20% of content in a typical organization.
I like what you mentioned about tacit knowledge and the context. It is really a differentiating factor, but also a counter argument, maybe coming from multiple vendors, will say, yes, we capture the context through ontology, and we do focus on the human context. But at the end, what's makes the real difference between the expertise-based knowledge management and the content-based knowledge management when it comes to context, and specifically when they claim through ontology and knowledge graph they are capturing the context.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. You know, the term that I came up with on this is chasing context because a couple key value propositions with knowledge management are clearly problem solving, decision making, improving the speed and the accuracy of those to make those as optimal as possible. And people are always chasing context, and we want to give them a leg up in small, medium, and large organizations and companies so that they can find the person to, because when you're chasing context, you're often really looking for the know how, know what, know why that's inside the head or the heads of colleagues that maybe you've never even met in person before. So chasing context and making those connections, connectivity is about cohesion, degrees of separation. So making the world a smaller place, and that's a big part of what expertise knowledge management is all about.
I like how you put it straightforward, chasing context and the know why inside our heads or the experts' heads. To complement on that, in the early days, whenever I hear the word ontology or knowledge graph, I remember my early days when I started working in system modeling. At that time, we used UML, Unified Modeling Language, and through different diagrams and types of diagrams. And we start to draw classes, relationships, attributes, and we had a lot of discussions about whether a role should be an attribute or a class association. Anyway, those are very technical stuff. However, UML failed to capture the system complexity or the constraints. And then the industry moved to OCL. And we tried to hard code the business rules through business rule engines. And then the industry shifted to semantic web standards. For example, if the same word used by two different organizations or functions means different things, or multiple words means the same thing. So this is where semantic web standards came into place, like RDF and OWL. However, this shift, and today we are still having new types of languages and techniques augmented with the AI, attempting to capture the context again. But here's the difference. Why capturing the context through the tacit knowledge is different than capturing the context through content or documentation? Because content based has a fundamental two flaws, two limitations. The first limitation is you need always a middleware, a translator, a technical specialist that understand the standards, the language, the model, and can translate the business requirements into a machine readable models. And the second limitation, by the time you model and you capture an image or a snapshot of the organization has restructured, or the product offering has renovated, or the market has shifted. So the model, the snapshot that you took about your organization has already become obsolete. So on contrary, and this is why we flipped the scenario, and this is why we shifted to expertise-based knowledge management. We needed a system that is self-correcting. Whenever there is a changes in the environment, the system will self-correct itself. Because context then is those unspoken rules, those hidden politics, those unwritten de facto standards. So how you can capture something that is not yet written? And this is where we capture the living network of people, the living experts through networks and communities. We design, and I like use the terms that you coined, human engineering. We design and we engineer the human relationships. So here's my question to you then. What will be the first step to start with whenever we want to design and engineer human relationships?
Well, what I start with is I ask organizations, whether I'm talking to a consulting client, to what for them is expertise, and then also to explain to them there's a significant difference between having some expertise and being a true certified expert. And a lot of people, when I go in and I talk with an organization, they're talking about, hey, expertise, this SME, subject matter expert, et cetera. And I'm like, well, let's get a time out, because I need you to be careful on how you use the terms, because there's a significant difference on being a true expert, and having some expertise. So we want both of those in our world of expertise-based knowledge management. But that's why I love how you created this vision here, and the three key components. Really, when we're talking about this concept of, it's a big, hairy, audacious goal, as Jim Collins talked about in Good to Great. The 1 degree of separation. Can we get there? I'm 1 degree, one person away from somebody that give me an optimal answer. So that's why I love this graphic of yours.
Yep. And this graphic, we want to bring clarity, and we want to be have a clear definition of what is expertise, because we have a lot of terms like competency, skills, abilities, capabilities, expertise. So we define expertise as intersection and integration and the emergence of three different capabilities when or dimensions when they are integrated. The people dimension, which means if someone has expertise, he is socially recognized. So his peers or her peers recognizes John as someone having expertise. The second dimension is capabilities. John is capable of producing novel solution to non-routine tasks. If those tasks are routine, then John will become a specialist. But since John is solving non-routine tasks and producing new practices and novel solutions, and so he's producing new capabilities. The third dimension is knowledge. And knowledge here we mean both theoretical and experiential. And that's the difference between a technician and an expert. An expert, he or she are capable to interpret data and observable facts and the reality with a theory. And they can predict a theory with observable data and facts. So they can give meaning to the reality through a theory, and they can predict the results of a new product through the theory by having some observable facts. So the integration between people, knowledge, and capabilities emerges what we call expertise.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
very, very
then
interesting.
I know you differentiate between different forms of knowledge, between data, information, knowledge, insights, and wisdom. So, at which level we start and we go beyond traditional content or document-based knowledge management?
It's that's a great question. I'm glad you're showing this graphic here, and I kind of want to start on the bottom. A lot of times I talk about, and somebody much smarter than me years ago, over 20 years ago, taught me this word aboutness, what we know about and what we need to know about. And yeah, it's the cool thing about AI, whether it's generative or agentic, is that it can be multimodal. But what I hear a lot of organizations talking about is just, pounding on this whole data, but I think they mean more. And you got to look at all of the what the organization knows about and needs to know about, what individuals know about and need to know about. And yeah, you can start with data, and then it becomes information. There's a little chaos there. But then when you get the knowledge, really, I'm referring there to things that are certified, validated, and verified as maybe the best of the best in your repositories that you definitely want to include in the mix when you're using your large language models within an organization. But then the insights and the wisdom. And this is what gets us at expertise-based knowledge management, because we want to include what people know about. Can we write down everything that's in everybody's heads? Heck no. We can't do that, nor would we want to do that. But for those valuable insights, we want to bring those forward in the context of agentic AI in particular, to solve problems more automatically and get better decision making, better answers, et cetera. Then the insight and wisdom pieces come into play.
Perfect. And that path going from data to wisdom, and in other terms, judgments to make the right judgment, whether I am trying to develop new expertise or new capabilities or develop a new type of, let's say, enablement. So, where do we start and how do we start throughout our methodology? You started this methodology 30 years ago. We took it further. We rooted this methodology in scientific research and models. And then we bake it with experience and we update it through different, let's say, scenarios and deviations, those cases on the edges. So we included those deviations into our methodology. What would you recommend to start with in order to start with this methodology? And if an organization wants to do so, do they need to go through all the steps, or they can pick and choose which activity and which phase to be engaged in?
I think the ecosystem you're showing here as expertise as a service, and expertise-based knowledge management, it's critically important to include all of these elements. I teach knowledge management at the master's and doctorate level, and the first thing I tell my students is this is all about people, leadership, and behavior. I know deep down that they wanted me to talk about how AI comes into play and how we can accelerate it. And yeah, everything can be accelerated based on what we're experiencing now and have experienced over the past 3 years. The point here is that we want to bring forward the people and what the people know about so that that can be included in the mix of the results that you're getting and how you're finding people. And again, driving toward consistent and better decision makings and solutions based on driving that cohesion number as close to two, maybe in a dream world, as close to one as possible.
Talking about cohesion and bringing people together, one of the deliverables that I like the most from this methodology is number four, expertise architecture. And to recall, in the early when we started our discussion, you mentioned and we defined we are designing and engineering human relationships. So one of our deliverables is the expertise architecture. So this architecture is not content-based architecture. It's not information architecture, and it's not your document architecture or your taxonomy. This is where your people are living, and this is where your people are connecting, and how knowledge flows from one area of expertise to another. And then, in an ideal world, you mentioned about 2 degrees. But what if we have this expertise architecture already, and we have implemented this for multiple clients, and our clients love this expertise architecture? So, how would you advise an organization, and what are the benefits that we can take out of this expertise architecture?
Well, basically, what you and I developed as a method is to find out where it hurts the most. But this is what I want the people listening to this podcast to imagine. Imagine this were the roof of a very large factory, maybe a data center. Okay, what happens is knowledge accumulates in different drainage points, like water would accumulate on the roof of that building. Okay, so we need to pay really close attention to those points of accumulation. That's why communities are a big piece of knowledge management, et cetera. Those are the accumulation points, but those are the places where you want to respect for the organization, where it hurts the most and where we can make the biggest changes and to make those connection points. The other part about this is that we don't just want to create silos, those places where that theoretical water is accumulating, that knowledge, and particularly the tacit knowledge. We want to make the connections, and that's why you can see the connectivity between why these different large areas where maybe it hurts the most and we have the biggest opportunities need to connect with each other. That's the connection of human beings here. This is the human engineering.
So you mentioned the accumulation points. What if those accumulation points are singular, which means we have heroes? Those points are individuals that are not connected to larger networks. They are acting as heroes, individuals accounting for the success or a failure of a project. So what will happen?
Well, this is a sociogram, and it's basically, showing that the robustness or density on the left of this chart. You can see it's kind of hard to make out, but there's pretty good connectivity. But this is where a lot of organizations kind of relegate themselves. They have people that thankfully are there, they're heroic. That's the term that you and I have coined for this. Everyone is going to them, but you can imagine a world where people are so burdened. And then the other thing that happens is, from a retention standpoint, people come and people go. So if you have people in the center that everyone basically is counting on to go to, and literally other people are in the mix in terms of go-to people in this sociogram. If you look on the left, you pull 10% out of that, and what happens? Well, that overall robustness, you can see the connectivity between the lines. This is what happens, and this is the threat to organizations when you look at how people are connected in terms of doing an organizational network analysis that you're looking at here. You don't want this. You're vulnerable. And expertise-based knowledge management can help organizations overcome this by getting more people in the game. And oh, by the way, we haven't even mentioned the word learning today, and how you can get more people connected, and they're not just sharing their own expertise, but they're also absorbing the knowledge as learners.
Then, with that, I'd like to transition to the practical, let's say, section. And this is how we turn everything we develop through the methodology into practice and into something tangible. And we have developed Flow with Carlos. Carlos is genius, and he's behind the engine of a flow. This is where we translate the expertise architecture, the human engineering into something operational. And I'm visualizing here and I'm sharing the set of communities or areas of expertise behind the scenes. Those are all connected. So if there's any kind of overlapping expertise topic, that it will be shared real time and in synchronous way. To showcase one community quickly, if I go inside electric vehicles, for example, we have different point of views and we have different aspects on how to work inside a community. Whether I am like a business process owner, I am focusing on a component, or I am developing some kind of content, or I am looking at a community from HR point of view or from competency point of view, and I try to develop some kind of competencies. The tacit knowledge, this is where all happening. This is where extracting the tacit knowledge through real-time dialogues. This is where it happens. And behind the scenes, everything is connected. And then we can also, what you mentioned about accumulation points and those individuals, we can curate and we can create dynamically the expertise profile of the community members. And here again, I stress and would like to get your point of view. Do we rely only on what is written to create those profiles, or we go beyond what is written, what is not yet written, and we capture it and we embed in those expertise profiles?
Yeah. Well, 3 years ago when we started off on this journey, we were living in this world where it seemed like 9 out of 10 of the companies were relegated to leveraging applications from that really large company headquartered in the state of Washington in the United States. I'm not going to name the company. And it just was for us in knowledge management and setting up communities, particularly expertise based communities, it was just a sea of mediocrity. So that's why we started to develop Flow and had a little fun with it, PHLOW, because in the triad of people, process, and technology, flow is reflective of the processes. So we want the knowledge to flow between human beings and in these communities as easily as possible without putting too much burden on people. And that's exactly what we created with this really fantastic approach to communities, but more importantly, to expertise based communities.
That's a great ending note. On that, Dan, I'd like to thank you. And if anyone would like to explore more this approach, please feel free to reach us, and we will be glad to support or provide any detailed session. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, everyone.